You gave everything, your time, your energy, your heart, without holding back. You showed up when they needed support. You listened when no one else did. You loved them in ways they had never experienced before. And somehow, in return, you became invisible, disposable, treated as if you no longer mattered. But what unsettles you most is this: it wasn't random. It wasn't simply bad timing or misfortune. Something deeper was operating beneath the surface, something Carl Jung devoted his life to understanding. The depth of your love, the sincerity you brought, activated something in them, something they could not confront, something they felt compelled to reject. The way they treated you says more about their internal psychological conflict than about anything you did. This isn't about excusing their behavior. It's about understanding the psychological mechanisms that can turn love into hostility, presence into pressure, and devotion into avoidance. Until you recognize this pattern, you may continue repeating it. Jung observed that we rarely experience people as they truly are. Instead, we relate to our projections onto them. Every person becomes a screen for our unresolved wounds, unmet needs, and unconscious expectations. When you loved them deeply, you weren't only loving who they were, you were also loving who you hoped they could be. But they were doing the same. In the beginning, they projected their ideal onto you. You became the solution to their loneliness, their missing piece, the answer to what they lacked. You felt chosen and understood. The intensity felt meaningful. According to Jung, however, this wasn't mature love, it was projection, and projections eventually collapse. The moment you revealed your humanity, your needs, your limitations, your vulnerabilities, the illusion began to fade. You were no longer an idealized image. You were a real, complex person, and that shift from pedestal to reality felt like betrayal to them. Not because you changed, but because their fantasy dissolved. Jung described this as the withdrawal of projection. The qualities they unconsciously placed onto you returned to their own psyche. Instead of accepting responsibility for the illusion, they blamed you. You were cast as the problem in a narrative you never agreed to join. The mistreatment wasn't truly personal. It was projection turning defensive. When they could no longer maintain the fantasy, they rejected the version of you they had constructed. You became evidence of their own self-deception, and people will often react strongly to avoid facing that. Jung explained that everything we refuse to acknowledge within ourselves is often rejected in others. He called this the shadow, the collection of traits and emotions we suppress because they challenge our self-image. Everyone has a shadow. Many spend their lives avoiding it. When you showed emotional honesty and vulnerability, you unintentionally activated theirs. Your openness reflected the softness they had learned to guard. Your emotional availability confronted their fear of intimacy. Your authenticity exposed the roles they were playing. Instead of seeing this as an opportunity for growth, they experienced it as discomfort. Jung repeatedly observed that those who trigger us most deeply are often reflecting disowned parts of ourselves. But without self-awareness, that reflection is met with resistance. You became difficult for them not because you were wrong, but because your presence stirred emotions they had long avoided. Your depth highlighted their avoidance. Your willingness to be seen contrasted with their hiding. Rather than turn inward and question their reaction, they directed it outward, toward you. This is shadow projection in practice. They assigned their rejected traits to you, and then criticized you for carrying them. If they feared dependency, they labeled you clingy. If they suppressed anger, they called you excessive. If they denied their pain, they minimized yours. Their behavior reflected their struggle, not your value. Acknowledging your worth would have required them to confront their own avoidance. For someone deeply invested in denial, that feels destabilizing. You did not deserve mistreatment, and their actions were not truly about you. Jung also emphasized that love dismantles psychological defenses. When you love deeply, boundaries soften. He described this state as participation mystique, a psychological merging where unconscious processes begin to interact. In such closeness, moods influence each other. Wounds are activated. Old survival patterns re-emerge. You become vulnerable not only emotionally but psychologically. Your sense of self can become tied to their validation. Jung noted that in this state, people unconsciously attempt to heal childhood wounds through partners. If you experienced abandonment, you may feel drawn to someone emotionally distant and try to earn consistency. If you were criticized, you may seek someone withholding and attempt to prove your worth. If you were overlooked, you may pursue someone distracted and try to become unforgettable. This process is not deliberate. It is the psyche attempting to resolve unfinished pain by recreating familiar dynamics. The difficulty is that the more you invest, hoping effort will finally secure the response you deserve, the more the pattern reinforces itself. Jung called this a complex and autonomous cluster of emotions and beliefs that shapes behavior without conscious control. You may believe that loving harder will change the outcome, but if the dynamic is rooted in unconscious wounds on both sides, effort alone will not transform it. Often, relationships that hurt the most reflect patterns we unconsciously participate in. Not because we are flawed, but because something unresolved is seeking healing, and that healing must begin internally. Your capacity to love deeply did not make you weak. It made you human, but it may have delayed recognizing that this person could not meet you at the depth you offered. The pain you feel now is not only about them. It is about seeing a pattern clearly for the first time. That awareness, however difficult, is the first step toward change. Jung also described relationships as operating on two levels: the conscious agreement and the unconscious contract. Consciously, you agreed to support and build together. Unconsciously, roles were being assigned. Old family dynamics were quietly reenacted. Without realizing it, you may have represented figures from their past: a parent they resisted, a sibling they competed with, an authority they rebelled against. This is transference, the process of transferring unresolved feelings from earlier relationships onto someone in the present. Transference does not only occur in therapy. It appears in intimate relationships. The closer the bond, the more likely old emotions attach themselves to the new person. If they experienced control growing up, your care may have felt restrictive. If they experienced absence, your independence may have felt like abandonment. If they were previously betrayed, your transparency may have triggered suspicion. They were not responding solely to you. They were reacting to unfinished history. Most people are unaware of this process. They genuinely believe their reactions are justified by the present. They cannot see that they are responding to echoes of the past. You were offering something new, but they were interpreting it through an old lens. And when you stopped conforming to the role their unconscious expected, conflict intensified. Jung also observed that intense attraction often arises because someone reflects parts of ourselves we have not fully lived. We are drawn to qualities we have suppressed: courage, honesty, freedom, emotional openness. But if your presence embodied traits they had denied, it also became confronting. Your authenticity highlighted their compromise. Your openness revealed their restraint. Your willingness to pursue fulfillment exposed their hesitation. You were not criticizing them. You were simply being yourself. Yet to someone who has structured their identity around avoidance, your integration of those qualities can feel threatening. Your presence became a reminder of choices they did not make. And rather than reflect on that discomfort, it was easier to diminish you. So the very traits that first attracted them became the ones they criticized. Your openness became neediness. Your depth became intensity. Your standards became pressure. Understanding this does not justify their actions, but it clarifies them. The way they treated you was shaped by their inner conflict, their projections, and their unresolved history. Recognizing that truth allows you to step out of the pattern without turning against yourself. Your passion was labeled as instability. Your emotional depth was described as excessive. They had to redefine your strengths as weaknesses because the alternative was too uncomfortable. Admitting that they had been living only partially while you were expressing a fuller version of yourself would have required painful honesty. Carl Jung described this as the meeting of two unconscious worlds. When two individuals connect, their shadows interact. Their projections overlap. The parts of themselves they have not lived out confront one another. Many relationships struggle to survive that level of exposure. Most people do not have the awareness to understand what is truly happening. Instead of growth, there is blame. Instead of integration, there is rejection. Rather than using the relationship as a mirror for self-reflection, they reject the mirror entirely. And you are left questioning your role in the outcome. The reality is simple: you reflected something true, and to the unconscious mind, truth can feel threatening. Jung explained that the ego's primary function is self-preservation. It works to protect the identity we have built about who we are. The ego defends that image at any cost, even if it is constructed from denial, repression, or outdated beliefs formed in childhood. When someone offers genuine intimacy, emotional depth, and authentic love, the ego may interpret it as danger. Depth requires vulnerability. It means acknowledging that we are still healing, that we carry unresolved pain, and that we do not have everything figured out. Depth asks us to reveal parts of ourselves that do not align with the image we carefully manage. For individuals whose sense of safety depends on controlling how they are perceived, this exposure feels overwhelming. You offered that depth. You showed up openly, without emotional defenses. You did not settle for surface-level interaction. You wanted to understand their fears, their insecurities, and the parts they kept hidden. You were seeking true intimacy. Their ego responded quickly. According to Jung, the ego will undermine anything that threatens its dominance, even love, even happiness, even the connection someone claims to want. If they had met you at the level you were offering, they would have had to dismantle the version of themselves they were protecting. They would have had to confront uncomfortable truths and process emotions they had long avoided. So the ego reframed the situation. Your desire for depth became control. Your vulnerability became weakness. Your love became risk. They chose the familiarity of their defenses over the challenge of authentic connection. They did not reject you as a person. Their ego rejected the growth required to love you fully. Acknowledging your value would have required them to evolve beyond the identity they were holding on to. And many people prefer preserving illusions over transforming themselves. Jung also observed a dynamic in which one partner's growth triggers insecurity in the other. He referred to this as psychic inflation, a defensive expansion of the ego to compensate for feeling diminished in comparison. As you grew, developing emotional awareness, resolving personal wounds, strengthening boundaries, it may have destabilized them. Your maturity highlighted their stagnation. Your healing reminded them of what they were avoiding. In such situations, Jung suggested there are two options: grow together or attempt to reduce the other person. Growth demands humility, effort, and self-examination. Diminishing someone else requires only criticism. Often, the easier path is chosen. They preserved their sense of stability by undermining yours. As you became stronger, the mistreatment may have intensified. Your boundaries were labeled as coldness. Your self-respect was called arrogance. Your independence was framed as selfishness. This pattern is common when one person pursues consciousness while the other prioritizes comfort. One expands, the other contracts. Over time, the psychological distance becomes too wide. Not because love disappeared, but because both individuals were moving in different directions. Jung emphasized a difficult truth: you cannot love someone into awareness. You cannot heal someone who refuses to face themselves. No matter how present or supportive you are, the internal work belongs to them. Transformation requires willingness. It requires choosing discomfort over defense and growth over familiarity. They were not prepared to make that choice, and that is not a reflection of your worth. Their inability to meet you emotionally reflects their stage of development, not your value. You cannot force maturity, and you cannot awaken someone who is committed to remaining asleep. Throughout his work, Jung observed how people repeat patterns in relationships, avoiding introspection and assigning blame externally. Many prefer the safety of their defenses to the uncertainty of vulnerability. You chose differently. You showed up honestly. You offered connection without guarantees. That requires courage. But growth also means recognizing when someone cannot meet you where you are. Walking away from that dynamic is not cruelty, it is self-preservation. It honors the awareness you have worked to build. Jung believed painful relationships function as mirrors. The essential question is not only why they behaved poorly, but why you remained. What part of you accepted less than you deserved? What belief made mistreatment feel familiar? This is not self-blame, it is empowerment. Jung argued that we unconsciously recreate unresolved wounds in relationships so they can become conscious and ultimately healed. Perhaps there was a belief that love must be earned. Perhaps there was fear of being too much or not enough. Perhaps there was a habit of neglecting your own needs to maintain connection. Their behavior was wrong, but your tolerance reveals where healing is needed. Jung famously stated that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. Now you are aware. Awareness is the starting point of change. You do not need their validation or closure. You need to ask yourself, what part of me believed this was acceptable? Then approach that part with compassion. Challenge the belief. Choose differently in the future. They treated you as insignificant because they were operating from their own emptiness. But you were never insignificant. And when you fully integrate the truth, you will stop engaging with people who attempt to convince you otherwise. That is the insight hidden within this experience. Thank you for staying through this reflection. If this discussion resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel and sharing this video with someone who may find it helpful.